This is not just a story about betrayal. It is about the moment a woman discovers the truth that shatters 40 years of love, and the strength she finds in the silence that follows. Stay with me, because once the lies are exposed, nothing will ever be the same again. They told me I was safe to leave, that no one would notice if I spent the weekend away with my sister. Go, my husband insisted, smiling as if he cared about my rest, as if he worried about how tired I had been lately. You deserve it. Don't worry about me. His words wrapped themselves around me like a comfort I wanted to believe, and so I left. At least, that's what he thought. But something inside me had been restless for weeks, maybe months. His eyes lingered on his phone longer than usual. His laughter came at strange times, sometimes alone in the kitchen with no one else around. He began to lock doors that had never needed locking in our home, and his excuses, late calls, urgent matters, sudden errands, always left a sour taste in my mouth. I didn't want to admit it, but the man I trusted was slipping through my fingers. So when I agreed to leave, I left a part of myself behind. Hidden in the corner of our living room, tucked discreetly behind a lamp where no one would think to look, was a small camera. It was something I had bought weeks earlier, on impulse, after yet another evening of unanswered questions. I told myself it was paranoia, foolishness. But as I closed the door that morning, suitcase in hand, I felt something in my chest whisper, "You will finally know the truth." The hours passed slowly that day. My sister's house was only across town, but it might as well have been another country. I sat with her at the kitchen table, nodding along to conversations I couldn't hear, my mind fixed on the image of my husband moving alone through our home. Every vibration of my phone sent a jolt through me, as if the camera might already be sending me secrets. It wasn't until late evening that I finally opened the feed. My hands shook as I unlocked the app, the black and white still frame of our living room filling my screen. At first, everything was ordinary. My husband pacing, pouring himself a drink, flipping through the channels on the television. Ordinary. Harmless. My heart beat against my ribs as if mocking me. See? You're wrong. You're imagining things. But then came the knock. The sound startled him. He moved quickly, too quickly, to the door, glancing over his shoulder as though the walls themselves might accuse him. When he opened it, the camera caught the figure stepping inside. Not a delivery man, not a neighbor, not a friend. A woman. Her hair was tied back, her coat clutched tightly in her hands as though she was nervous, but her smile, oh, her smile, was unmistakable, familiar, intimate, the kind of smile you don't give unless you already know you are welcome. My throat closed as I watched. My husband didn't hesitate. He took her coat, touched her arm, led her inside like someone who had done it 100 times before. His face, the same face that kissed me goodbye that morning, lit up in ways I hadn't seen in years. I couldn't breathe. My sister's voice became a distant echo, her hands waving in front of me until she realized something was wrong. But I couldn't speak. My eyes were glued to the screen as the truth unfolded in black and white pixels before me. They sat together on the couch, close, too close. He poured her a drink, laughed in that soft way he never laughed with me anymore. He leaned in, brushing her hair from her face, and she rested her hand on his knee like it belonged there. The weight of it crashed down on me. This wasn't new. This wasn't accidental. This was routine. And all I could think, over and over, was how easily they had lied to me, how confidently they had sent me away, knowing I would believe, how foolish I had been to think my absence meant freedom for me, when in truth it was permission for them. The image froze in my mind, the two of them side by side in my home, on my couch, in the life I had built, while I sat miles away, holding a phone that showed me everything I had refused to see. That night, as tears blurred the screen, I realized something brutal. Sometimes the worst betrayals are not shouted into the world. Sometimes they are whispered in the quiet, carried out behind closed doors, waiting for the moment you are told you are out of town. And I had the proof. I don't know how long I sat frozen with the phone in my hand, my eyes refusing to blink as if even a second of darkness might erase the evidence. The living room on the small screen became more real than the one I knew. Every detail I had once loved. The couch we picked together after months of saving, the lamp I had chosen for its warm glow, the rug where our children once sprawled with toys, suddenly turned into a stage for betrayal. They didn't act like strangers sneaking into something forbidden. That was the part that cut the deepest. There was no hesitation, no awkwardness, no fear of discovery. She leaned against him with the ease of someone who had done it many times before. He touched her shoulder with a familiarity I hadn't felt from him in years. The way he looked at her, soft, attentive, alive, was the way I had once prayed he would look at me again. The seconds crawled into minutes, the minutes into hours. My sister kept pacing the room, whispering, "Turn it off, please, don't torture yourself." But I couldn't, because once you have the truth, you cannot look away. Lies blind you, but truth holds your eyes open. I watched them talk, laugh, lean closer until there was no space between their bodies. I felt my chest tighten until I could barely breathe, as though the air itself had turned into shards of glass. And then, without hesitation, he kissed her. Not a fleeting kiss of impulse, but a slow, deliberate one, the kind born of intimacy and history. I dropped the phone into my lap and pressed both hands against my mouth to keep from screaming. My sister wrapped her arms around me, but I felt nothing. My body was numb, my mind burning with images I would never erase. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a confession in itself. Proof written not in ink, but in gestures. In the softness of lips meeting lips. In the betrayal of a man who once swore that I was enough. Every hour after that was a blur of torture. I kept the feed open, my eyes raw and swollen, watching them move through my home as if it belonged to them. They laughed in my kitchen. They poured wine into glasses I had bought. They touched the photographs on the walls, the ones of my family, my children, our anniversaries. At one point, she traced her fingers over a frame of me and him on our wedding day, and instead of shame, she laughed. That laugh nearly broke me. By the time he led her upstairs, my hands were shaking so violently I nearly dropped the phone. My sister begged me to shut it off. "Don't watch this. Please." But my body refused to listen, because deep down, I knew this was not about discovery anymore. This was about confirmation. I had suspected. I had felt it in the distance between us, in the silences that lingered too long, in the way he smiled at his phone instead of at me. Now I was watching the suspicion transform into reality, frame by frame, with no possibility of denial. When the screen went dark for a moment, when the camera could no longer see them because of where they had gone, I realized the betrayal was bigger than one night, bigger than one woman, bigger than one marriage. It was the collapse of a world I had believed in, the burning of a life I had built with blind faith. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat upright, staring at the frozen frame of my own home, feeling as if I had been exiled from it. He had turned it into something unrecognizable, something corrupted, something that no longer belonged to me. And yet, as much as it shattered me, I also felt a strange kind of power flicker inside. The proof was mine. The lies were no longer hidden in whispers and excuses. They were written in actions I had captured with my own hands. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't imagining. And with that truth, my silence began to crack. When I finally returned to the house, everything looked the same on the surface, but nothing felt the same inside me. The front door creaked the way it always did. The familiar scent of cedar and coffee lingered in the air, and the living room lamp cast its usual soft glow across the rug. But I couldn't unsee what I had seen on the screen. Every corner of that house now carried the imprint of her presence. My hand hesitated on the doorknob for a long moment before I stepped in. I felt like an intruder in my own home, like a stranger trespassing into a space I no longer recognized. The silence inside pressed down on me, louder than any noise, filled with echoes of their laughter, their whispers, their footsteps walking across my floors. He was sitting in the kitchen when I arrived, sipping his coffee as though it were just another morning. He smiled at me, that practiced smile I had once trusted, and asked how my trip had been. His voice was steady, casual, the same voice that used to comfort me when life felt too heavy. But now every syllable sounded false, poisoned by the knowledge I carried in my chest. I answered simply, my words short, because anything longer would have broken me. As I set down my bag, my eyes drifted to the counter where 2 wine glasses stood in the sink, their rims still faintly stained. He noticed my gaze and quickly turned away, muttering something about forgetting to clean up after himself. The lie was so small, so careless, but it landed like a hammer inside me. I had seen the glasses clink together in their hands. I had heard their laughter spill out as the wine poured. And now here they were, evidence not washed away, sitting in the sink like a monument to his betrayal. Walking through the house was unbearable. The couch where they had sat together looked harmless, but I could still see her leaning into him, his hand brushing her hair away. The rug beneath the coffee table carried the sound of their laughter like a wound etched into the fibers. Even the staircase felt tainted, each step a reminder of where they had gone when they thought I was away. I wanted to scream at him, to throw the glasses against the wall, to hold my phone in front of his face and force him to watch himself as I had. But my body froze, paralyzed between fury and devastation. Instead, I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides storms, and said nothing, because silence, in that moment, was sharper than any accusation. That night, lying beside him in our bed, I couldn't close my eyes. I stared into the darkness, listening to his breathing, steady and calm, while my heart raced in my chest. My body stiffened as he rolled toward me, his arm draped across mine with the ease of routine. It should have felt familiar. It should have felt safe, but it felt foreign, a stranger's touch pretending to be love. The shock of being home wasn't in seeing what was different. It was in realizing that nothing looked different at all. The betrayal had left no physical trace. The pictures on the wall still smiled down at me. The kitchen still smelled of cinnamon. The bed was still warm. But beneath it all, everything had changed. Because once you know the truth, you can never return to the lie. And I knew then, in the quiet darkness of our room, that this house was no longer my home. It was a stage where he performed his part, and I had been cast as the blind wife. But the blindfold was gone now, and I could see every shadow. The shock of coming home was not discovering what had happened while I was gone. It was realizing that even when I was here, it had been happening all along. The hardest part wasn't the proof itself, or even the images burned into my mind of another woman in my home. The hardest part was pretending. Pretending to sit across from him at breakfast as though my chest wasn't splitting apart. Pretending to listen to his stories about errands and work as though I didn't already know where his time had really gone. Pretending to share the same bed, the same space, the same life, while carrying a truth so heavy it pressed against my ribs like a blade. I thought I would explode with rage the first night back, that I would throw the camera footage onto the table and demand answers, demand apologies, demand explanations that would never be enough. But instead, something colder took root inside me. I realized that if I confronted him without care, he could deny it. He could twist my words, tell me I was imagining, accuse me of mistrusting. He could take my truth and turn it into doubt. So I chose silence. Every time he reached for me, every time he kissed my cheek, every time he asked me to pass the salt at dinner, I said nothing. I studied him instead. I watched his movements, his eyes, the way his hand twitched when his phone buzzed. I noticed the nervous laugh he gave when he thought I wasn't looking, the way his shoulders tightened when I lingered too long near the drawer where he kept receipts, the way he avoided mentioning evenings I knew were spent in betrayal. The silence became my weapon. He did not know how much I had seen, how much I had uncovered. He did not know that every lie he spoke sounded louder to me than it ever had before. And the longer I remained quiet, the more unsettled he became. One evening, as we sat in the living room, he asked if everything was all right. His voice was calm, but his eyes flickered with unease. I smiled, nodded, and said, "Of course." The lie tasted bitter in my mouth, but I let it hang in the air between us. His gaze lingered on me for a moment longer, searching, but I gave him nothing. And in that moment, I saw something new, fear. He was beginning to sense that I knew. At night, lying beside him, I let the silence stretch until it suffocated both of us. He would shift, restless, trying to find comfort, while I stared at the ceiling, stone still. Sometimes I would feel him glance at me in the dark, his breath catching slightly, as though he was afraid of the thoughts behind my stillness. And I reveled in it. For the first time in years, the silence was no longer his, it was mine. The silent confrontation was not a scream, not a fight, not a battle of words. It was a war fought in glances, in pauses, in the weight of things unsaid. Every time I withheld my fury, every time I kept my voice steady, every time I allowed the silence to grow thicker, I watched him squirm under it. And though it did not heal me, it gave me strength. Because silence, when wielded with truth behind it, can be louder than any scream. And I knew one day soon, it would break. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of day when the house should have felt peaceful. The windows were open, the curtains swayed lightly with the breeze, and the smell of coffee lingered in the air. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, his hands folded, his eyes darting from the cup in front of him to my face, then back again. He was nervous. I could feel it in the way his foot tapped against the floor, in the way his throat tightened before he spoke. "Can we talk?" he asked softly, almost too softly, as though he feared the sound of his own words. I braced myself, my body stiff, every muscle tense. For weeks I had been waiting for this moment, for the confrontation to take shape in more than silence. My heart pounded in my chest as I nodded. He leaned forward, his voice trembling, and said words I never could have imagined. "If anyone ever asks, if anything ever comes up, promise me you'll say you knew nothing." The request struck me like a blow. I sat frozen, unable to process it at first. He didn't confess. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask for forgiveness. Instead, he asked me to lie for him, to protect him, to shield him from the consequences of his choices. He knew that the woman he had brought into our home wanted more than stolen evenings. She wanted recognition, a place, maybe even a future. And he knew it would only be a matter of time before whispers reached ears that couldn't ignore them. Our children, our neighbors, our friends. He was asking me to erase myself once again, to stand in silence so his secret could remain intact. My hands trembled on the table. The anger that had been simmering inside me flared like fire, but beneath it was something colder. Disbelief. After all I had seen, after all I had endured, this was what he wanted from me. Not truth, not repentance, not even an attempt at explanation, only my complicity. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time I saw him stripped bare. Not the man I married, not the man I built a life with, but the coward who sat before me now. His shoulders hunched, his eyes wide with fear, his voice pleading not for love, not for understanding, but for silence. "You want me to lie for you," I whispered, my voice low, steady, dangerous. He flinched but nodded. "Yes. For us," he insisted, his words desperate. "For the family. To keep everything together." But we both knew the truth. He wasn't asking for us. He was asking for himself. The impossible request hung in the air, heavier than any confession could have been. Because in that moment, I realized what he truly thought of me. I wasn't his wife. I wasn't his partner. I wasn't even the substitute love I once believed myself to be. I was his shield, his excuse, his silence. And that realization cut deeper than betrayal. Because it wasn't just that he had chosen another woman. It was that he had chosen to sacrifice me yet again. I pushed back from the table, my chair scraping against the floor. My hands shook, but my voice did not. "I won't protect you," I said. His face drained of color, his mouth opening in shock, but I didn't let him speak. "You made your choices. Now you'll live with them." The silence that followed was like a storm waiting to break. He stared at me, stunned, as though the woman sitting before him was someone entirely new. And maybe she was. Because in refusing his impossible request, I had taken back something he had stolen from me long ago. My voice. And in that moment, I knew there would be no going back. After the impossible request, I thought I had seen the darkest part of his betrayal. I thought nothing else could wound me deeper than his cowardice, his willingness to make me complicit in his lies. But the truth is like fire. It doesn't stay contained. Once lit, it spreads, searching out every hidden corner, burning away illusions you never even knew you carried. In the days that followed, I began to notice things I had once overlooked. Tiny details, almost insignificant on their own, but when pieced together, they formed a picture I could no longer ignore. A faint trace of perfume on his shirt, one I didn't own and had never worn. Receipts tucked into his wallet for dinners he had claimed were work-related, yet the restaurants were the kind that served wine by candlelight, not the kind where business meetings took place. Calls made late at night, numbers saved under initials, as though reducing a name to a letter could erase its meaning. One afternoon, while he was in the shower, I opened the drawer where he kept his things. My hands shook as I sifted through the papers, my heart pounding in my chest as though it already knew what I was about to find. And there it was, a folded note, scribbled on cheap paper, written in a rushed hand. The words were simple, but they sliced me open. Last night was perfect. I miss you already. I sank to the floor, the note trembling in my hands. It wasn't just her. There had been others. Maybe before her. Maybe after her. I didn't know. I didn't want to know. But what I understood then was this. My marriage wasn't just scarred by one betrayal. It was built on years of them, stacked one upon another like a tower of secrets that had finally collapsed under its own weight. And once I allowed myself to see it, the discoveries multiplied. A missing hour here, an unaccounted-for purchase there, a faint lipstick smudge on a shirt collar he swore was just laundry detergent. The lies weren't clever. They were careless. They weren't rare. They were routine. And the only reason they had lasted so long was because I had trusted him, because I had loved him enough to close my eyes when my instincts screamed at me to open them. But now, my eyes were wide open. Every discovery was like a thread being pulled, unraveling the fabric of the life I thought I had. The anniversaries where he seemed distracted, the vacations where he stepped away for business calls, the sudden trips that never quite added up. All of them came back to me, clearer now, sharper now, proof that the betrayal had been woven into our story from the start. And yet, strangely, the more I uncovered, the less it crushed me. Each lie revealed, each secret exposed, didn't weaken me. It strengthened me, because every new piece of truth reminded me of something vital. The problem was never me. I had spent years wondering if I was enough, if I had failed to be the wife he needed, if I had somehow pushed him away. But the discoveries told me otherwise. His choices were his own. His betrayal was his own. And no amount of loyalty from me could have erased the emptiness inside him that drove him to fill it with lies. The discoveries hurt, yes. They tore at me, left me raw, left me trembling, but they also gave me clarity. And with clarity comes power. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the truth anymore. I welcomed it. I searched for it. Because only with truth could I finally see the man I had married, not the illusion I had built around him, but the coward who had always been hiding behind my devotion. And with every discovery, one thought grew louder inside me, impossible to silence. This marriage is already over. The only question is how I will end it. It was not a day I planned. I didn't wake up that morning deciding that the truth would finally spill into the open. But sometimes life arranges its own confrontations. Lies can survive only so long before they collide with reality. And when they do, they explode. It happened on an afternoon heavy with summer heat. The windows were open, and the air carried the sound of children playing in the street, the barking of dogs, the ordinary hum of life. Inside, though, my house was anything but ordinary. I had spent the morning rehearsing conversations in my mind, practicing words I wasn't sure I would ever speak. And then the moment arrived, uninvited but undeniable. She showed up at the door. I heard the knock and froze. My husband rose quickly, too quickly, his chair scraping against the floor. His face paled, and for a moment he looked like a boy caught stealing, not the man who had stolen years of my life. I didn't move. I only watched as he opened the door, and there she stood, the same woman I had seen through the cold, unfeeling eye of the hidden camera. The woman who had laughed in my kitchen, sat on my couch, touched the photographs of my life as though they were hers. This time, she was not smiling. Her hand clutched her purse tightly, her eyes sharp with something between anger and desperation. "We need to talk," she said, her voice breaking slightly. He stepped outside, trying to close the door behind him, but I was faster. I placed my hand against it, pushing it open, my gaze fixed on hers. For a moment, silence fell. The three of us stood there, suspended in an unbearable stillness. Then, with a calm I didn't know I possessed, I said, "No more secrets. Not in my house." She looked at me, her eyes widening in surprise. Perhaps she had believed the lie he had fed her, that I knew nothing, that I was oblivious, that I was the blind wife in the background. But the steadiness of my voice told her otherwise. I invited her inside. He tried to stop us, stammering protests, his face slick with panic. But it was too late. She stepped into the living room, and suddenly the ghosts I had watched on the camera came alive in flesh and bone. The couch where they had sat together loomed between us, a witness to everything. And then it all unraveled. Her words came fast, heated, laced with betrayal of her own, promises he had made, future plans whispered in her ear, lies he had told her about me, about our marriage, about his devotion. She thought she was the only one. She thought she was special. And as she spoke, the walls of deception he had built began to collapse. I didn't need to add much. The camera footage, the notes, the receipts, all the discoveries I had collected. I didn't even need to show them. Her words were enough. Every sentence she spoke confirmed what I already knew. He was not just unfaithful. He was a man who built entire worlds out of lies, balancing them precariously until they tumbled down on everyone around him. He begged then, his voice cracking, his hands reaching out to both of us. "It's not what you think. I can explain. Please, just listen." But I didn't listen. Neither did she, because we had already heard enough. That day, the truth finally came into the open, raw and undeniable. No more shadows, no more silences, no more pretending. The man who sat in our living room, broken and desperate, was not the husband I had once believed in. He was simply a liar, exposed by the weight of his own secrets. And as painful as it was, as devastating as it felt, a strange kind of relief washed over me. The lies were no longer mine to carry. The silence was no longer my prison. The truth was out. And in its harsh light, I could finally breathe. It was the day everything came to light. And though it shattered the life I had built, it also set me free. I thought that the day she walked into my living room and poured out her own betrayal was the peak of the storm, that nothing else could possibly surprise me after what I had already uncovered. But life has a cruel way of hiding its sharpest blades until you are already bleeding. What came next wasn't just another wound. It was the twist that broke open everything I thought I knew. After she left, the house was suffocating with the weight of silence. He sat slumped in the chair, his head in his hands, muttering fragments of apologies that meant nothing. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I only watched him, waiting for a flicker of the man I had once trusted. But all I saw was a stranger drowning in the consequences of his own deceit. That night, I couldn't sleep. My body ached with exhaustion, but my mind replayed every word she had spoken, every confession that slipped from her lips in anger. One phrase in particular clung to me like a thorn I couldn't pull out. She had said, "He promised me everything, even what's supposed to be yours." At first, I thought it was just her bitterness speaking, but the more I turned it over in my mind, the more it gnawed at me. What did she mean? What's supposed to be yours? The answer came the following week when I decided to dig deeper, not into his phone or his wallet this time, but into the very foundation of our life together. I requested copies of financial records, documents I had never questioned before because I trusted him to manage them. And that was when the twist revealed itself, cold, and brutal. There were transfers. Large ones. Quiet ones. Money moved into accounts I didn't recognize, accounts under names that weren't mine or his. Dates matched perfectly with the timeline of his supposed business trips, the ones that had always left me uneasy. He hadn't just betrayed me with his body or his heart. He had betrayed me with the very life we had built, the savings, the inheritance meant for our children, the security I thought we shared. He had been building another future, one where I did not exist. The discovery hit me harder than the camera footage, harder than the note, harder than her arrival at our door. Because while those wounds cut at my heart, this one cut at my survival. He hadn't just lied to me. He had prepared to erase me. I confronted him with the documents in hand, my voice steady even as my chest trembled with fury. He tried to explain, stammering about obligations, debts, promises. But the words fell apart before they even reached me, because the truth was right there in black and white. He had chosen her not only with his lips and his touch, but with his plans, his future, his money. The unexpected twist wasn't simply that he had betrayed me again. It was that all along, he hadn't just been sharing our home with someone else. He had been planning to replace me entirely. And in that moment, standing there with the papers shaking in my hand, I realized something I had been too afraid to admit before. The man I had loved was gone long ago. What remained was only the mask he wore, and I was done living with it. The twist shattered me, yes, but it also gave me clarity sharper than ever before. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was about survival. And I knew then, the end was no longer a choice. It was a necessity. The papers trembled in my hand long after I confronted him, their weight heavier than any weapon. Numbers and signatures, dates and transfers. Cold, undeniable proof that my life had not only been betrayed, but dismantled piece by piece while I slept beside him, while I cooked his meals, while I believed in a love that no longer existed. That night, as I sat alone at the kitchen table, the house silent except for the ticking clock on the wall, something inside me shifted. For weeks, I had been living in shock, swinging between grief and rage, suffocated by the question of how 40 years could be rewritten in a single confession. But now, with the truth spread out before me, I realized I had a choice. I could continue to sit here, drowning in the wreckage of his lies, or I could rise from it, not as his wife, not as his shield, not as his substitute, but as myself. It was not an easy choice. My hands shook as I began gathering the documents, placing them into folders, arranging them carefully, methodically, as though preparing for battle. In a way, I was. Because this was no longer only about heartbreak. This was about reclaiming my dignity, my security, my life. The turning point came in small acts at first. I began sleeping in the guest room, locking the door behind me, refusing to let his presence press against me in the night. At meals, I no longer cooked for both of us. I placed my plate on the table, ate in silence, and left his chair empty. When he tried to speak, when he begged, when he pleaded with trembling hands and watery eyes, I stared through him as though he were already gone. And in many ways, he was. For decades, I had carried his silence. I had bent myself around his absences. I had accepted half-love as if it were enough. But with every lie that surfaced, with every secret exposed, I felt the weight on my chest begin to loosen, because I finally understood what he could not admit. His betrayal defined him, not me. One evening, I stood before the mirror in the bathroom, staring at the woman reflected back. Her hair streaked with gray, her eyes lined with age, her shoulders bowed with the weight of years. But beneath it, I saw strength. The strength of someone who had endured. The strength of someone who had survived not one betrayal, but countless. The strength of someone who had been lied to for years, and yet still stood. I whispered to that reflection, my voice breaking but firm. No more. That was the turning point. Not the camera hidden in the living room, not the woman at the door, not the letters, the notes, or even the financial betrayal. The turning point was the moment I chose myself over him. The moment I stopped waiting for an apology that would never come, for a love that had never been mine, for a man who had always belonged more to his lies than to me. He watched me shift, though he didn't fully understand it. He saw it in the way I carried myself differently, in the way my silence no longer felt like surrender but like defiance. He saw it in the way I moved through the house as though it was mine alone, as though he were the intruder now. And maybe he was. The turning point was not loud, not dramatic, not even visible to anyone outside these walls, but it was the day I reclaimed myself. And once a woman reaches that point, there is no turning back. The house is quiet now, but it is no longer suffocating. The silence that once belonged to his lies, to his secrets, to his absence, has become my own. For the first time in decades, it does not choke me. It comforts me. Because within this silence, I hear the steady beat of my own heart, the voice I buried for 40 years under the weight of his betrayals. When I look back on everything, the camera feed flickering in the dark, the wine glasses in the sink, the note hidden in the drawer, the woman at my door, the financial records that cut deeper than any confession, I no longer feel only rage. I no longer feel only grief. I feel clarity. His choices were his own. His lies defined him, not me. And though he thought he was erasing me, he was wrong. What he erased was himself. I gave him everything. My youth, my devotion, my loyalty, my forgiveness. I built a family with him. I built a life around him. And yet, even when he gave me only fragments, I still gave him wholeness. That is not weakness. That is not foolishness. That is strength. Because the truth is, love given freely is never wasted. Not even when the one receiving it was unworthy. The years we spent together are not empty, even if they were built on his betrayal. They are mine. The laughter of my children, the warmth of birthdays and holidays, the little victories of ordinary days, those were real. He cannot rewrite them. He cannot take them. The love I carried, the sacrifices I made, the woman I became through endurance and survival, those are mine to keep. And so I refuse to let his betrayals define me. I refuse to let his shadows erase my light. I refuse to spend the years I have left haunted by the ghosts he invited into our home. Instead, I choose myself. On what would have been another anniversary, I sat alone at the kitchen table. No wine glasses, no lies, no staged smiles for the sake of appearances. Just me and a single candle flickering in the quiet. I whispered words I had never dared to say out loud before, words meant only for me. I was never your love, but I am mine. And from now on, that is enough. The flame wavered, steady and fragile, like my own heart, but it did not go out. It glowed against the dark, against the silence, against the years of being unseen. And as I sat there, watching it burn, I realized something I wish I had known decades ago. Being chosen by someone else does not define your worth. What defines your worth is choosing yourself, even if it comes at the very end of a lifetime. So, this is my final reflection. His betrayal was the end of us, but it was not the end of me. I am still here. I am still whole. And I am finally free.